Okay, so this is part one of the Team Losi Racing 22.4 build series. And for the part one, I basically just got through the first parts bag. So there's a total of, let's see, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So there's like 7 or 8 parts bags in total. And I just got through bag A, which basically covers what you see here. So putting on the mud guards and some of the front and rear gearbox assembly, as well as the center slipper clutch and the jack shaft assembly towards the rear here, and installing all 3 belts. Commentary so far, as far as how the build has gone, I would say it's good, not perfect, but good. The instructions are fairly straightforward for the most part so far. I did manage to let's get the bad stuff out of the way for now. So I did strip one screw. Let's see, it was part of this here. So when you put in this whole front gearbox assembly, there's I think 7 screws that you have to put into the bottom of the chassis, and I stripped this screw head here as I was screwing it in. I think the screws that are used are fine. They're just your standard steel screws, probably the same type of screws you would see on something like an RC10 B5. But because they're not strengthened steel, or they don't appear to be, the screw heads may strip. So I had to replace that one screw head with a ProTech high strength screw. I just happen to have a couple bags of those. So have some spare metric screws lying around, particularly of the flanged 3x12 or 3x10 variety, because there are a couple of those. But the fit and finish so far is pretty good. This back piece right here, it slots right into some slots in the chassis, as does this whole assembly here. So everything goes together pretty nicely, although again, I did strip one screw. Not too big a deal. When putting this assembly together, there were several parts bags involved. So there's a parts bag A, and for each of the parts bags, there are several sub parts bags, like an A1, an A2, A3, etc. So here you see parts bag D, the parts bag D1, D2 through D4, and so forth. Now for parts bag A, bag A1 and A2 did not necessarily correspond to steps A1 and A2. So for the slipper clutch assembly, this actually took something like 2 or 3 parts bags. But that's not a huge deal because it's all within parts bag A, so it's really not a big problem. Just don't get confused by the labeling of the sub parts bags and the actual step that you're on. Just make sure you know what pieces you're looking for. It would have been nice to see some more detail on the slipper clutch assembly. So for example, here you're looking out in this direction in the isometric view. It would be helpful to look out in this direction as well, because there's this little plate here that closes off this pulley, and on the jack shaft, or sorry, not on the other side of the slipper where the clicker goes, there's another little plate here that closes off this pulley. And they look the same, but they're actually not the same. If you look on the other side of this plate, on this one there's a little notch that comes out, and on this one there isn't. So it's apparent when you actually look at the parts, because the size of these pulleys is different, so the diameters are different. But at first glance, it can be a little confusing. They also do not tell you what's the default setting for tightening down the slipper nut here for your default slipper clutch tightness or looseness. So this is just something you're going to have to do manually. And you know, Team Losi, to their credit, they do have a nice video on how to set up your slipper clutch. So it's not a big deal if you have access to the internet. The only other gripe that I have so far is that the clips that they use here on the lay shaft and also on what they call the jack shaft here, these are not E-clips. They're more like, kind of like C-clips. They look a bit like this. Okay, so there's a notch on either side, but there's no sort of notch in the middle here. Now, it's not, to a first order, you'd think that's not a problem it snaps onto the little slot on the shaft just as easily as an E-clip. The problem is, if you need to, say, change the pulley, if the pulley wears out, it's a lot harder to get this out, because with an E-clip, you at least have a notch that you can like dig the pointy end of a knife or something into to pop that E-clip out. Here, the whole clip wraps around this sort of notch in the shaft, so pulling that clip out is going to be more challenging. Let's see. So that's as far as the complaints department goes. The difficulty of the build up to this point is not so bad, because we're just in the first fraction of this build. I would say that because you're dealing with 3 belts here, you need a little bit of manual dexterity to put everything in place. So the way the manual has you do it is you put in the main lay shaft first with the front belt and the center belt, and then after that you put on the jack shaft with the rear belt. But the thing is, when you mount the jack shaft, there are these 2 little plastic pieces at either end, and these are used to adjust the belt tension, and these slot into some housings in the gearbox. So you have to, and they're rotating on bearings, so these things are rotating while you're trying to align them and make sure that this pulley's in place and this pulley's in place and press everything in. It just takes a little fiddling to make sure you get it right. It's not too bad, it just takes some time. Let's see, is there anything else I want to comment on here? The front belt and the center belt are 2mm pitch, and they're the exact same total length. Okay, so they're interchangeable. The rear belt is a 3mm pitch, and the belt tension is adjustable for both the center belt and the rear belt. But for some reason, I don't know why, the front belt is not adjustable. This here is a fixed tension. So it seems a little strange, because you'd expect each belt to wear in and eventually start to loosen up. So I would expect the front diff to start, slipping along the belt if this belt loosens up, and I'd want to be able to adjust the tension there. But maybe Team Losi found that the front belt is actually not a problem. Maybe you don't need it to be adjusted. I don't know. But I can tell you that this is a non-adjustable tension here, but the center belt and the rear belt do have adjustable tension. You get, I think, a bag H somewhere in here with all the different parts that you need to adjust over the entire tension range for both the center and rear belt. So it's very nice that they included that. Let's see, what else do I want to point out? Well, I guess I also wonder why, from a design perspective, why they went to different pitch belts front and rear. So again, this is 2mm, this is 2mm pitch, this is 3mm pitch. You'd expect the 3mm pitch to be stronger than the 2mm pitch belts, because the teeth are deeper and fatter. So why not just use 3mm belts all around? Well, we do know from way back in the day, in the old YZ10 days, that 2mm belts are in fact more efficient. So it could be that they found a way to, have the right amount of tension for these 2mm belts, even though they're a little more sensitive, while maintaining longevity, and perhaps most of the power ends up getting coupled to the rear anyway, and so they put a 3mm belt here to handle that extra power. So that's my guess. I can't really say for sure for the time being. But it is interesting that they use different pitch belts, front and rear. So that's the build so far. Technically speaking, the end of the A phase is to put this cap over this guy here, but I wanted to keep that off to show you this assembly. I am electing to go with the locked clicker, so this is going to give me full-time 4-wheel drive. Let me see if I can just slot that back in there. But they do tell you, in either case, how to set it up for either full-time 4-wheel drive or with the clicker assembly. The only difference is here you have this little red aluminum sort of hub that you just lock against the clicker. Otherwise, you would just have a spring with a little plastic end piece here and a nut, and you can adjust the tension. What was kind of neat is that they actually give you 2 springs, a soft spring and a medium tension spring, depending on how finely you want to adjust that clicker action. So I think that was nice of them to do. So I'm going to move on to phase B, which is going to be I believe this is the rear diff assembly, and the installation of that, and a few other steps. and I guess I'll make another video, hopefully after each stage, A, B, C, etc., and make commentary on that. So this is what I have for now, and thanks for watching.